would now like to start the debate. I would like to invite the first speaker of the affirmative.
There is no version of this world where sentencing your own child to a young death and suffering is worth them having an unfulfilling short period of fame and a lifetime of guilt. Four things in today's speech. Firstly, on some setup. Secondly, the principle of informed consent. Thirdly, how we provide our child with a more fulfilling life. And then finally, how we mitigate suffering for the parent. So firstly, on some setup. What is the prophecy foretelling? Firstly, it's that your child will go on to achieve greatness. This could be like something heroic, or could be like peaking in a career, like being a brilliant artist, for example. Secondly, they will have an everlasting legacy. So this means that their name is probably known by most in that particular area that they did get that greatness in, and their work or like their career is going to be like carried on, whether it be in like writing or someone's inspired by it in a future generation. Thirdly, they do suffer. We think that this is independent of their actual death. This is going to be while they're living. Like, this is an extended period of time. We think it could be months, it could be years, where they suffer with like either this physical illness or they suffer with like a mental health illness. We think this isn't good for them. Fourthly, they die young. We think that we define young as like teens to 20s, at best like 25. So to win the debate, we have to prove that we get more net fulfillment and happiness for one, the child, or secondly, the parent. They're both individuals deserving of this happiness and fulfillment. They both matter in this debate. So firstly, on the principle of informed consent. We recognize the importance of giving people the freedom to choose, but there are greater principal rights that come above this, like having the ability to have informed consent. This means that they have the right to choose. The right to choose is less valuable when you don't know what it is you're choosing. Like, people make choices by evaluating their personal benefits and what they have to gain. They can't make this evaluation and make a valid decision without the information to do that. So some examples of society being okay with the principle of informed consent over absolute freedom of choice include, like, firstly, on like not being able to consent to sex when you're like under the influence, or you're pressured, or you're underage, because they all impair your ability to be informed. Therefore, they don't have the right to make that absolute freedom of choice. Secondly, the fact that parents make decisions for children, like what school they go to, what food they eat, what activities they do, because kids don't have the ability to make all those decisions for themselves. Thirdly, like, you would stop your friend from doing something that might harm others or harm themselves because you believe that their freedom of choice isn't as important as their right to having the informed consent of like knowing what their actions are actually going to do. Fourthly, we have like suicide prevention services in place. Like literally, if you have issues, like police or like hospital workers will show up to your house and actually restrain you because we value life more than having absolute freedom of choice. So why can this child then not make an informed decision? Firstly, they're just like biologically undeveloped. Their brain isn't fully developed until like 25 to 30. This is why, particularly as a child, you don't have like a prefrontal cortex fully developed, which is why like teens are so impulsive. Secondly, they don't know what their destiny actually is. Like, basically what we think happens here is a creepy old man just like rocked up at their door and was like, oh, you're gonna go on and do well. And note that prophecies are very vague. Like, they don't actually have the like precise ability to weigh death and suffering over the success that like we think is going to be short term. Thirdly, they don't know what their life will look like. Like, they are young, they haven't experienced the world, they don't know like the capacity of emotions, they don't understand culture and people, they haven't had all those interactions to make informed decisions. Fourthly, kids are coerced into wanting greatness. Like, they have these fantasies, they want to be like a warrior or a king or a dinosaur. Like, these things are either impossible or just are largely unfulfilling because they're like dead or have a huge stress. They don't see this, they are coerced to believe they want it. What this means for the debate is that the right of choice is not enough in this debate. The parent has more information to make this decision for the child. We value their life more than their freedom of choice. So, moving on to how we provide our child with a more fulfilling life. What is the nature of happiness? Firstly, happiness and fulfillment is long term, right? In one moment, there is an emotional capacity for how much you can feel and how much you can experience. Great happiness needs to be spread out over a long period of time to have a fulfilling life. Secondly, satisfaction comes from work paying off. Like, a win is not good if you just cheat to get there. You have to work hard in order for it to fulfill you. So what does this kid's life look like without the prophecy? Firstly, their reward isn't handed to them. On neg, kids just accept that they have greatness coming to them, so likely they don't work towards it because their brain wants to take like the path of least resistance, and like kids are kind of inherently lazy. On our side, A, they don't anticipate happiness, which means it's more meaningful when they do receive it, and B, they're like, it's coming from their work, like whether it's in a career or whether it's in their relationship that they've like thrived over adversity. This is way more fulfilling for them. Secondly, they enjoy the little things. Like for example, on neg, the child is never satisfied enough. Like take for example Elvis Presley, who was like super famous, but he always wanted more. He could never stop and appreciate what was going on in his life that led him to that led him to his death ultimately. On our side, like we have things like in the Pacific Islands, who are like ranked as one of the most happy countries, but they're like in severe poverty. We think that this can apply to this child, but So thirdly, they have more time to build this happiness. In neg's best, the kid dies at like 25. On our side, they live to like 90. This is a 65-year gap. This is triple the lifespan that the kid on neg is living. This is huge for them. Neg has to prove that this one moment of greatness can outweigh a lifetime of 65 years, even if that happiness can be like minimalized slightly. Fourthly, on neg, they don't get to experience the full capacity of life. They don't get the ability to like have a marriage or like retire and look back on your life. And most importantly, they don't get to have like kids, which is a biological need for humans. They want to see their legacy live on. So what does this mean? We provide more fulfillment for the child when they live on. They get to live a full life. This is what is most important to us as humans. We weigh this over any resentment that the parent might get because the child is happy and the parent obviously wants that for their child. They want to see their kid have grandkids. They want to see those people grow up and do well in their lives. Yes, I'll take a feel on it.
If this child actively hates themselves as a result of knowing that they could have been great, why is it a valuable trade-off for a long life if they literally have no support systems and are living a life of self-loathing?
They don't actually understand what the legacy is. Like, I told you that this like creepy old guy just came and gave them a prophecy. Like, it's unlikely that it was any tangible outcomes that they would actually receive. Now they have the ability to look forward on a career where they could like climb the rankings, they could be more successful, they could build relationships and like have a family. This is what is more important to them. They have tangible outcomes that they can see. This is far more fulfilling for them. So moving on to how we mitigate suffering from the parent. So what do parents care about most? They care about the lives of their children. Like firstly, they're biologically wired to do anything so that their kids will live. Like evolutionary, secondly, they spend so much time with them, like they've literally raised them, they've given birth to them, or like at least been present while they grew up, like living with them for so long, they have like these relationships with them that are very in-depth. So how is the parent affected by the prophecy? Firstly, they have the power to stop it, which means that when they don't stop it, they have the personal guilt, they have the blood on their hands for the rest of their life. Secondly, they never see their child again. They never get that effect of being in retirement and having your child come and visit you and tell you about how their kids did at school. Thirdly, even if the child doesn't forgive them on our side of the house, parents will always hope that they do. And fourthly, that means they still contact them. The child will probably grow to understand in part at some point. So this means that the parent's well-being and happiness is very important in this debate. We value this very highly. We want these families to be successful.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech. I'd now like to invite up the first speaker of the negating.
Harry, where's my bag? I just want some water. Oh, wait, never mind. It's right behind me. 65 extra years of actively hating yourself because you thought you could be great. 65 extra years of hating the people you're supposed to love because you thought they robbed you of the opportunity to help and save the world. I think that's the comparative they're supposed to defend. That's the way we win this debate. 2 points for the House. First, about what are the principal and practical obligations for the parents. Secondly, about why undoing the prophecy will harm greater society. On the principal obligations for parents then. Note then that consent to live in this life is not necessary, the point at which this life was predestined and that was their natural course of life. What we would tell you then is that life is the only thing you can't consent to anyways, the point at which that is already what you're destined to live. I don't think you need to consent to that. Note then that consent only comes when you have to change the course of your life. I think what this means is that the child needs to consent to change their life because that's just what happens. I think when the moment you alter the course of their life, that's the point at which consent is necessary. That's why children need to consent. But secondly, on then just why children are rational in their choices. 2 reasons. Firstly, I think people generally want to live long lives. That just means that people want and understand the issues that come that when you are told that your life will necessarily be cut short. I think even children are able to understand that they do want to live longer. I think the point at which they actively choose against that, that's kind of important. It means that it's a relevant choice to make. But second is that people just know what suffering is, right? I think the concept of what suffering looks like is generally quite prominent. I think, they don't really know the specifics of what suffering looks like, but they just understand the idea of suffering, I think is quite important. Noting that in response to their point about informed consent, what we would tell you is that parents also aren't very informed on this front. Noting that they think that parents do have a lot of information, I don't think this is the case for 2 reasons. First is that parents have a vested interest in ensuring that their child lives longer. Noting that this is innately selfish and not necessarily in the benefit of the child. This looks like how a lot of parents like to keep their terminally ill children on life support because they just think that they want their children to live longer, even if it means they're going to suffer in the long term. I think parents have a vested interest that mean that they're also unable to make a rationally informed decision. That's the point at which they're unable to claim that parents are more rational. But second, note that parents also don't understand what this kind of success and suffering looks like. Note that that's the exact same issue they put on the child. Parents also don't understand what this creepy old guy is saying. I think it's quite clear that it's just symmetrical, the level of which consent matters. I think that's the point at which children ought to be listened to, the point at which you do strip them of their autonomy to choose what kind of life they live. I think that's really damaging. Note then on the practical obligations of parents. The practical obligations of parents are to ensure that their child does live a good life. That's the point at which their principle is contingent on actually ensuring that your child does live a good life. The idea of being able to make informed consent is only relevant as insofar as that consent does bring you benefits, I think. Why do we think a good life looks like? 2 things. First is about maintaining good relationships with the people who should matter to you. Noting that if you spend your life hating people you're supposed to love, I think your life will be pretty bad, right? If you look at your mum every single day when you wake up and tell them that you actively hate them because they have robbed something from you, I don't think you're living a pretty good life. I think you're going to be actively quite sad in that front. Note then that parents have a strong support networks for their kids. They do bring a lot of benefits to them. The point at which they are actively excluding themselves from that support because they dislike their parents, I think that's the point at which they are unable to have a good life. But secondly, a good life looks like being able to live up to the expectations that you set for yourself. Note then that when a child knows that they could have been great, your psyche changes, right? Just for example, if Harper told Benji that he would make WSDC, but then he didn't, I think the level of sadness is incredibly great, the point at which you actually thought that you could have achieved greatness in the first place. Note then that Ollie said that there aren't actually tangible benefits that the prophecy actually brings to you. I think that makes it even worse for children, because as Ollie liked to say, children love to fantasize. I think the point at which children think that they could have actually saved the world, honestly, even if they couldn't have, even if their benefits were quite small. I'll explain why that's not the case. But the point at which they thought they could have changed the world and are now living some mediocre life for 80 years of their life, I think that's the point at which they suffer even more. Okay, 2 impacts for this thing. Firstly, the child loses out on a relationship with their parents. Why is the parents important? Firstly, parents provide a necessary support network when you're struggling in life. They're just uniquely good people because they are mature adults. They have strong emotional connections to you. I think the point at which you look to the people who support you and tell them that you hate them, I think that's really damaging and they lose that out. But secondly, that parents provide necessary life lessons, right? I think being able to learn and grow up well with your parents just teaches you how to be a good person. I think the point at which they're able to have that relationship with their parents. Note then that they necessarily support never having that relationship with their parents. I think that's the point at which their mediocre life actively does become worse. But third is that they're very approximate to their parents, right? Note then they have to see them every single day for 18 years of their life while they're growing up. I think that's the point at which every single day they suffer because they actively have to be in a room with a person they hate. That's really damaging. But second, though, just the child lives a life of suffering. Note then that the child is going to live their whole life thinking about how they could have been great. This leads to issues like self-loathing when they think that they could have been something that they've been robbed from. They're just going through their daily mediocre life being really sad. Note then that the weighing on this point is that it lasts a very long time. Note this is 65 extra years of hating yourself, right? Note then that also the affirmative necessarily extends the duration of their suffering. Even if we do only suffer, even if you do buy the idea that we're going to suffer to a greater degree, note then that only lasts like 5 years, I think is what they roughly support. Note then that they're suffering literally for 65 years of their life when they're never able to forgive their parents, when they're never able to see themselves as valuable members of society because they feel robbed. I think that's really important. Before I move on, I'll take a point of information.
Even if the child's image of you as the parent is so perfect, why would the relationship be tainted by the fact that the parent has sentenced their child to death and is now corrupt by guilt?
I think the child understands that it's not actually sentenced to death. I think it's quite clear that the child knows how, I think it's quite clear that the child knows what a short life looks like. The point at which they do accept this with the same amount of information as the parent, with the same level of informed consent as the parent, and they consent to having that short life. That's why it's different. Okay, why will undoing the prophecy harm greater society then? Note then, how does a person gain an everlasting legacy? I think the wording of that is very specific. Firstly, it's that many people need to know of what you've done. I think this is just something innate in having an everlasting legacy. It's not about your local individuals. The point at which everyone for the rest of time will literally know who you are, that's the point at which the benefits are necessarily going to be so great and so huge, right? No, then it needs to be secondly significant enough for lots of people to care about it. I think the degree to which you actually help society is understated on their side. I think the fact that it is everlasting means that it's going to last for a very, very long time. Okay, why was there going to be harm to society then? Firstly, the child has a unique capacity to do good for the society. Note then that the prophecy only applies to them, or even if it applies to many other children, they support fate, ending that for all of those children. Note then that the capacity required to achieve greatness for a normal person is incredibly low. It's very unlikely that you can do something like solve cancer or find adequate cures to cancer. I think that's very low capacity. It means that the capacity of the child is uniquely high. But second, the benefit to society is guaranteed in the short term. Note then that the child is guaranteed for greatness in their short life. That means in the next 20 years, there will be some great things happening. It means that the benefits happen now, rather than in a speculative future where it might or might not happen. I think those benefits are really important. The impacts of this are just people live better lives, right? Note then that this applies to literally everyone, the point at which the scale of their benefit is so large they're able to get that legacy. Literally, it means that everybody will live better lives. I think that's really important, the point at which everyone can just go throughout their day with marginal benefits, feeling really happy about themselves. I think that applies significantly on a matter of scale, just the fact that it's everyone, but also just the depth of benefit of people living good lives. All those reasons I'm very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I'd now like to invite up the second speaker of the affirmative.
True happiness comes in the small moments. In waking up to birds chirping over a beautiful sunrise. In seeing your children giggling with their friends as you pick them up from school. In treating yourself to a Friday Starbucks treat for so long that the barista knows your name and order off by heart. These are the things that you actively take away from your own child when you let them suffer and die, and you had the power to prevent that. Any parent would never let this prophecy stand. I have 4 things I want to talk about in this speech. Firstly, on the right to informed consent. Secondly, on the happiness of the child. Thirdly, on society. And fourthly, on the well-being of the parent. So firstly, on the right to informed consent, what did we hear from negating? They told us that you don't need to consent because it is the natural course of life for that child. We tell you that firstly, the natural course of life is to live, right? That is what evolution does. That is why natural selection exists. Like our very genetics are encoded to make us survive so that we can then pass on those genetics, right? But we tell you that secondly, that magic isn't something that we can just bank ourselves on and like think that, oh, we just have to like accept that this magic is true. This is the same way that like just because someone who believes in a certain religion does believe that that religion is the natural course of life, it is still principally wrong for that person to then push that religion onto someone else and force somebody else to live in under that way of life. We tell you that like it does require the consent of this child and they do not have the information to do that. Ollie told you all those reasons why. They tell us that people generally want to live long lives. We tell you that this doesn't engage with the mechanisms that we gave you at Ollie for why these children will be unable to make these decisions because they biologically don't have the capacity, because they don't have the experience to understand. They tell us that like parents are also like not rational and like neither side understands like what this greatness might actually look like. What we tell you that the parents do understand, that the children don't, is what the child is missing out on. The parents have lived a life. The parents have gotten into a relationship. The parents have had their own children and had that experience of like raising a legacy, of seeing your happiness reflected in someone else. That's the difference here. That's what the parent has that the child doesn't, and that's why they are the ones who have the principal right to make this decision. We tell you that children are inherently coerced into choosing greatness because their worldview is fantastical, because they play with action figures that tell them of like knights in shining armor and dragons, because they watch movies that reflect those images that aren't what reality is like. So of course they're going to want the greatness. Of course they're going to want to listen to the magical wizard because they don't know that that's not what life is about. We respect the right of the parent to make this choice over the child. Now on the child's happiness. They tell us that the child actively hates themselves because they want to achieve greatness and then they don't do this. We tell you that firstly, this is something that happens often in life and people are able to move on and get past it. This looks like a child wanting to grow up and become a doctor their entire lives. They work through school, they try hard, they work through the first year of uni to get there, but they don't get into med school. We don't see these people spiraling into depression. Yes, maybe it will be a hard time for them in the next few years, but they move on. We always move on. That is the nature of humanity, to be resilient. There are so many other things in life. People don't naturally bank themselves on one path. They have many friends, they have hobbies, they have relationships, so that when one thing falls out, you have other things to fall back on. But we tell you that secondly, just because maybe they might not agree with that one parent's decision, they probably have another parent, they probably have other family members, they maybe have siblings, they very much likely have friends. These are all kinds of people that can support them through this like hard time, even if they do want to completely distance themselves from their parent. We don't think that that is even the case though. Thirdly, we tell you that this doesn't engage with what we tell you about like the nature of satisfaction and the nature of fulfillment, and that you need to like actively participate and put effort in to have that fulfillment pay off. We tell you that when this child is told that they will achieve greatness, that means that like naturally as humans we take the path of least resistance, and particularly for children who are like quite kind of wired to be lazy. That's going to be the case. They're not going to do anything that actively gets them that fulfillment, which means that yes, that greatness will come to them, but like it's only one small moment. And we tell you that fourthly, it doesn't engage with the fact that this child has to suffer. Not only are they dying, but the emotion literally states that there is a period where they suffer, which means like an immense amount of like physical pain. Maybe they like have a terminal illness, or an immense amount of mental pain. Like you have to weigh this suffering that they cause, as well as the like missed opportunities that we tell you in those 65 years of life against this one moment of happiness. Then they tell us that the child hates their parent. Note that a lot of the material relies on this fact that the child is going to hate their parent. Firstly, it's never said in the motion that the child will hate their parent. It is only said that like they just never forgive their parent. Why does this never forgive not translate to actively hating? Because secondly, we tell you that complications with parental relationships are normal. We tell you that even children with abusive parents still love them because they are wired to. Because those are the people who like got them through their first few years of life. Because those are the people who raised them, who taught them how to be in individuals, even if there is conflict in your mind, you never just completely turn off of your parents. You still want some form of relationship with them. But thirdly, because we tell you that children mature. Like, yes, of course, they're going to have strong emotions at a young age. I did maybe say, I hate you to my mum when she turned off the PS4, right? But like, we tell you that like, when children go up and when they learn like the nature of life, they learn the like nuance in emotions, that they don't reach these like strong conclusions, that they are more likely to understand why the parent made the decision that they did. Maybe they'll come to agree with the parent's decision, and that will be good. Even if they don't come to agree with the parent's decision, we think they're going to be mature enough to at least understand why the parent made the choice that they did, and that will like not lead some of this hate. What this means then is that in their best case, yes, the child might not forgive the parent, but they don't actively hate them. They don't get that suffering that comes from that hate, and they're still probably going to want to be in their life to some degree. I'll take a POI before I move on.
Look, biology spec knowledge is great, but a child does not need to consent in order to live a prophecy. That is their original life path that was set out for them. Why is it then principally justified to actively undermine your child's ability to consent in your own personal interests?
I already told you why like magic prophecies aren't something that we as humans know how to weigh. We have to use the principal frameworks that we know, which is that life is the most important thing. They tell us that it's like really important that we help society and that you get this everlasting legacy. We tell you that firstly, this greatness doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually helping society. We tell you about people like artists, musicians, and actors who do have an everlasting legacy, who do reach greatness in their careers. People like Van Gogh, they're famous to some degree, but they're not like actively helping people in the same way that they want to characterize it like. But secondly, we tell you that like the parent doesn't know what this greatness is going to look like. They can't factor that into the decision. Then thirdly, we tell you that even if you believe that you do get some benefit for the child, we think that as the parent, you would never weigh the any kind of benefit to wider society over, firstly, your own happiness and your own suffering when you actively let your child die, but secondly, the happiness and fulfillment of your child that you rob from them when you let them die. What this means then is that like this benefit to society falls out of the debate because we are speaking from the perspective of the parent. This means that our material still stands about the long-term happiness that we provide to the child. They never tell us why this greatness is inherently fulfilling. They only tell us why you're going to be sad on our side of the house. We take that material down so we can still win there. Then lastly, on the well-being of the parent, they never engage with our material on how it's much worse for the parent to have actively caused their death than it is to have to deal with them never forgiving them, because they will still see them and they will still hope that one day they can make amends.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I'd now like to invite up the second speaker at the negator.
Luca tells you the little things in life are what make it worth living. The problem is that what their side does is create a direct comparison. Because what they told us is that people, naturally like these big things. They like to have a large legacy, and therefore, a normal person can maybe enjoy those small things, but this child isn't a normal person. This child was a person destined for greatness, and every single moment of those small moments, every single time they have single time they spend moments with their family, they have to constantly think about things could be, they have to constantly think about how much better things could be. That's why they never get any fulfillment. That's why this child suffers significantly more, and that's why we're going to win this debate. So, a few things in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to address the point on the suffering of parents. Secondly, I'm going to talk about on which side the child suffers more. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about consent. Fourthly, I'm going to talk about the societal utility of this, which we got pretty much a one-liner response. So, firstly, on the suffering of parents, I have two responses to this. Firstly, if you care about your child so much, you don't want them to constantly insult you. You don't want to be reminded every day how much they hate you, what you're going to do on their side. They're never going to forgive you. They're never going to listen to you. They're going to tell you about how much they hate you for ruining their life. Secondly, it's that this clearly clearly is not an important actor in this debate. This is not an actor that's having their consent violated. This is not one of the many people who could have their lives vastly improved for this child fulfilling their legacy. So this shouldn't be considered in your adjudication. Next then, moving on to the suffering of this child. What they told us is that people are lazy, they don't work for this stuff, and therefore they don't get fulfillment from fulfilling this prophecy. Two broad things here. Firstly, presumably this kid loves the idea of the prophecy, that they care about, achieving greatness so much, which means that this probably is particularly an important thing to them. They probably don't care about that process of hard work as much as actually achieving that greatness in general, considering the fact that they would never forgive their parent for this, considering all of their analysis as to why kids, presumably like these kind of things. Secondly, is that to fulfill the prophecy, you just need to do things, right? So it's not that they just don't do anything and suddenly the world changes, it's that they see an opportunity for them to fulfill their prophecy and they go and act on that. So they do get that satisfaction of hard work. They then said, well, people always want more, which means that you can never be satisfied. But also you reach that peak, right? You reach that peak of having an everlasting legacy, of being incredibly great. So even if you're not fully satisfied, I would suggest that Elvis Presley is far more satisfied than the average person who had to live a life of mediocrity. The comparative is that they still want to do that on their side. They still want to do better because you're never fully satisfied with their achievements. But there are two main reasons to why it's significantly worse. Firstly, is that you have far lower capacity to be better on their side because you don't have a prophecy which gives you greatness. But secondly, is that all achievements now seem mediocre if they knew what they could do. Having a child isn't important when you could have changed the course of history. None of what you ever do matters. Going to mid school matters, and you're being a doctor and saving a life doesn't matter because of how many you could have done. The comparison is why those things that would usually make a life fulfilling means that they can never have fulfillment on their side of the house. Now then, all I want to talk about here is legacy and why people heavily prioritize it. Because note, we're all constrained by a limited life. We're all plagued by existentialism. That we're an ant in the universe. That literally nothing we does matter. Why does me being at a debate tournament matter here, right? Nobody's going to remember this in a couple years. Maybe there's some really big debate nerd like me that's like, oh, there was this guy, Jamie Pett, and maybe he was good, maybe he's not, I don't know. But realistically, eventually that's not going to matter, right? And people are plagued by that. Nothing you do actually matters, and this is why people constantly scramble to get their legacy ingrained. People have to constantly live with this up to the moment of their death. On our side, we don't need to do that, because this child knows that their legacy will be everlasting. We want their side, they have to constantly suffer with that. Now then, there are a couple things I want to mention. Firstly, we heard no response to Bruce's material on how you're not going to be able to engage with your parent and get all the support networks of that. Bruce outlined to us why this is incredibly important. But I'd also like to know, life just naturally has suffering, right? Life naturally just has bad moments. Life has moments where, you lose round 1 and 3 of maths, and it's really, really stressful, guys. There are moments where things just go wrong and it sucks. But on their side, they have to live this throughout their entire life. Maybe our life ends early. Maybe we have a period of intense suffering, but at the very least, we don't have to live it nearly as long as them. Maybe it's bad for me to be stressed out for a whole weekend, but I think it's relatively fine, right? I'm probably gonna go back and be fine after Nats. But if I had to live my whole life like that, that would obviously be incredibly bad. Note why this is debate winning in of itself, because all of their material on consent is predicated on them preventing something bad happen to the child. Obviously, if we can prove that something good happens to the child and that there's less suffering overall, that means that this means that there's not a situation in which a parent can intervene. And here I just want the reason as to why this is obvious is I can't consent to feeling good things. I can't consent to the dopamine being in my brain. But obviously parents shouldn't go in and just stop me from feeling good things because I can't consent to that. So at the end of that, clearly we win on suffering, which wins this debate. Next thing, let's move on to consent. They said you don't have informed consent. I would say we have far more information on our side because the child knows they will suffer, they know they will die, but they know that we will at very least get benefits from that. And their side, they have far more uncertainty. You don't know if you will live a long life. You don't know if you'll suddenly get sick and die, suddenly get in a car crash, not live through terrible relationships, live through a backbreaking, unfulfilling, unsatisfying job. You don't know any of the things that could happen, which is why information is far better on our side. He then said, well, children are oftentimes irrational when it comes to this decision because they're sort of like starry-eyed, I guess. I have two main responses to this. Firstly, there is an innate biological preference to live, which acts as the countervailing force against this. They even concede this in their speech where they talked about how you want to live and pass on offspring. But secondly, is that friends and family want you to live. They can tell you that if they value your life and they don't want you to die young, all of which acts as the countervailing force. But this child still ended up wanting to prefer this prophecy, which means that I think that this is a rational choice that they're making. They then said, well, they don't have a developed brain. Guys, you don't need a fully developed brain to understand that MLK's life was great. This isn't that complex of a concept. I think that they're stretching this analysis to an extremely large degree. So what we proved here is we went on consent, but not I already proved why consent isn't important. We went on that anyways, just to be a little silly. So, point.
Other than this short period of triumph, on your side of the house, the child lives their life knowing that they will die and suffer while they know that. How can you weigh the beneficial outcomes that you present over that?
Well, on their side, you guys actually never get a moment of satisfaction because you have to constantly live a life of mediocrity, as I spent a bunch of the time on my speech on. Finally, then on like the societal utility of this, they tried to say that this was just a local area. No, because it's easy for communities to forget someone. It's easy for a generation to just decide to not pass on someone's legacy because they didn't prioritize it enough, which means that you need a lot of people to be affected by this for a person to pass down. So this doesn't look like just a local area. It looks on the scale of nations where your legacy lasts and the people that you affected. They then said this is like you'd be just an artist. No, because culture and what good art changes over time. Maybe there's like a really awesome caveman, which was great at hitting stones and made like really funny noises, but that guy's forgotten, right? Because we don't see that as good art anymore. In the future, when there's different interpretations of art, this person will be forgotten. But obviously they can't be forgotten because they have an everlasting legacy. So it's like you to look like a revolutionary, like you to look like someone changing lives. And the reasons to why I should weigh this above everything else in the debate is because everyone doesn't consent to living a bad life. Everyone doesn't consent to being born, and this child is able to make their lives better. On their side, they're not just making a decision for the child, they're making a decision that affects all of society. A parent does not have the principal justification to step in there. That's why you should oppose.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I'd now like to invite up the third speaker of the affirmative.
Okay, two primary points of clash in this debate. One, we have the effect that this will have, like the effects on the child, and then second, we have the effects on the parents. But before I get onto this, I want to go over a few clarifications and responses. And the first is this very contentious point around consent, okay? What did we hear from the negating side on this, okay? One, a large point of theirs in relation to consent was that kids understand dying, and that kids will understand suffering. So they'll factor this into this decision. Why is this simply not true? Well, one, we gave you literal biological reasons why they simply can't process these things. Two, they don't have lived experiences of suffering and death to measure these things up against. And also, three, people's values and things change over time, right? So if we picture a child being young and as they seeded to us, fantasizing about how glorious their life could be because of this prophecy, and then they grow up and realize that they actually do want to have a family, they do want to change these things, they're locked in this state of fear because they know that their death and suffering is inevitable and coming, but they can't do anything because they made a decision when they were young and had different values. So even if you buy the material that they have the actual cognitive ability and life experience to make an informed decision, the bottom line is because your values change over time, this is actually going to be really harmful and detrimental to them when they're in the peak of their career later in life. What else did we hear from them about consent? We heard that parents aren't necessarily the best people to make this decision either. They used a really niche example of people putting keeping their kids on life support. We think that is extremely different from the situation situation sort of falls out. But second, even if you don't believe that they have perfect knowledge of the situation, the bottom line is, as we told you at Luca, they have a lot more life experience and know what it's like to like go through school and raise a family and like have a job, things like this. And so they actually want their kid to live through it. They're just a much more beneficial actor to make the decision because they're more educated. The last thing we heard from them is that like we're actually altering their life by making this. But I think that like the bottom line is, like regardless of what you believe about that, this is a really important decision, right? And so it is up to the parent in this case and also just in society to make these big decisions for the kid. This looks like, hey, maybe a kid has a condition that they need to get an operation on. Yes, technically the operation is like diverting from their actual life, but this is like beneficial for the child and we trust the child to make this decision. Now on to a next clarification, and I think this is like the scale of the impact this child is making. Based on like the exact wording of the motion that we heard from the negating side, they told us that like because there is like it's called an everlasting legacy, that this means it's like super massive, it's going to affect a lot of people. One, I think the bottom line is like even if you buy that is going to affect a lot of people, I think the way that we've framed it successfully so far and have no pushback on mean that both the child and importantly the parent are incredibly important stakeholders. But second, the bottom line is one individual I don't think can have such like a massive and like permanent effect on society that like it outweighs these really important things. I don't really think that that helps them win this debate. Okay, next, I also just want to address a small point from their second speaker where they told us that like the child might get sick and die anyway, they might die early anyway, but in the motion it tells us how they will have a long life. So this means that you can actually be insured and like know that your child will live a long life and get to experience these things, and so you can actually trust that these positive, like raising a family and going through school and having a job, will actually happen to them. Now to get on to the points of clash, and the first that I'll address is the effect that this has on the child. Okay, so what did we hear from the negating side? Okay, well, they told us that like a large part of their case was that the child's life is going to be bad for those 65 years, that this is actually a bad thing for them to experience because they're going to hate themselves and have this self-loathing. Okay, why is this simply not true? Well, one, even though they tried to tell us that they're going to be really lonely and depressed because they don't have contact with their parents, one, it is really important to note, and we've told you this before, that there are other social networks you have, right? You have your friends, you have other family members, which they also agree are like important to children as well, that you can contact if you really need support and things like that. Second, we told you why like it isn't really realistic to say that they're going to cut all contact, right? We told you how complications in parental relationships are normal. So even if you do not ever forgive them about this thing, you still have other incentives and reasons to care about them and stay in contact. So in our worst case, you at least still have minimal contact. They're not completely by themselves and without a parent. And then third, that entire point about 65 years being miserable is dependent on the idea that just a normal life that isn't famous, that doesn't affect a lot of people, is really just boring and depressing. That is like just blatantly not true. We gave you multiple examples, things like, you know, getting married, having children, the small things in life are like really beneficial, and the reason like why they wouldn't actually be depressed this entire time. Okay, we don't see the majority of people who aren't like, you know, making necessarily massive everlasting change in the world being incredibly depressed, because we have things that just on a human and like level and small scale make us happy. So what this means is that they can't claim anything that they've told us about the 65 later years of life actually being really like horrible for them, because they feel like they missed out on everything. And to continue on to that, secondly, they don't actually, as we told you, know exactly what they missed out on. Okay, when you're a child and you hear vaguely that you'll do something great, you don't know what this looks like, you're not really going to measure this up and hold it against yourself for the rest of your life. And secondly, even if you do, right, we've given you multiple examples. For example, like with medical school, people try things and fail. That's the bottom line. They've missed opportunities, they should have like pushed for something when they didn't, and they still live with this. We don't see like massive mania from the public because they missed out on things. People can adapt to this, they move on. I don't think it's a realistic characterization why this specific thing that missed out on is actually like so important and going to affect them for the rest of life. They haven't proven why this is actually so pertinent compared to other things that people miss out on. Okay, the only way that this, and even if you believe that this child is going to be like really depressed and like for the rest of their life, so even if they're like extremely depressed, or like, you know, even if they want to like take their own life, the bottom line is even if they die, that is symmetric. But I think it is like safe to say we would prefer that we have a living child who is sadder but still gets to experience all these things through life, even if they do have a tinge of regret throughout it, than having a dead one and having to live with that the rest of your life with the guilt. As a parent, I will take a POI before I move on.
Your analysis is that the child will be hurt, so the parent needs to intervene. If harm is the metric, isn't the harm people experience from not having the benefit of this prophecy being fulfilled far greater.
I've already addressed that earlier in my speech. I have more important material to cover. Okay, so next on to the next point of flash, and this is the effect that's on the parents. Please note that they tried to tell us that like the parents aren't actually an important stakeholder in this debate and that this shouldn't be factored in. Note first, through the framing that wasn't contested at all throughout this debate, like this is actually the parent making the decision. I think this is like the main point of view that this comes from, and it also is just important because as we've proven through this consent point, like the parent is an informed person who should be making this decision. Note that we gave you a really negative effect that went effectively unaddressed by the negating team when we told you that this is guilt that this parent has to live with for the rest of their life, right? This is like the lived experience of not having your child come to visit you when you retire, but it's also seeing that they're having this success and they're doing these things at the moment and knowing that they'll die. A flow-on effect of this is that the positive relationships that they claim will happen on their side of the house don't happen because this parent, one, knows that their child's going to die and suffer young anyway, but secondly, are also just aware of the fact that like they did it, right? You had the option to save your kid and not have them suffer and die. So when it happens, you know that that accident or car crash or like drug overdose that they were involved in, you were directly responsible for and have to live with that for the rest of life. So you can't actually maintain a positive relationship, okay? Because of the severe guilt. And even after the fact, even when you can't have a relationship with them anymore, you just live every single like part of your life knowing that this was harmful. So that means that if you have a long life, you have 40 years left, for example, you're like actively suffering much more intensely on their side of the house, okay? So what, just to finish up, what did we have to hear from the gaining team? They had to prove to us that the short-term happiness outweighs 60 plus extra years of life experience and positive events. We've shown you why those 60 plus years aren't going to be miserable, why there are things that will make you happy, and why, and they also failed to show why that short-term period of happiness will actually be happy. They just told us that you'll still work hard, but the fact you know this is going to happen and will happen anyway under the motion doesn't prove it. They also failed to show why the child can make an informed decision that should be honoured, and we showed why the parent should actually be making that instead. And then thirdly, they have failed to address why the parent won't suffer more. I'm incredibly proud to affirm.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I'd now like to invite up the third speaker of the negating.
This debate is not about children like me and you. This debate is about an extraordinary child who is told that they have the capacity to be something great. They cannot use their own experiences. They cannot use the experiences of a normal child in order to describe how they'll react to the implications of this motion. That's the point at which I think they lose. 3 things I'm going to do in this speech. First, I'm going to make sure that this whole thing on net societal impact, it doesn't fall out of this debate. Second thing I'm going to do is explain to you why the child literally suffers more on their side, and also why parental relationships suffer. Thirdly, I'm going to explain to you stuff about consent. Okay, first, on net societal benefit, they can't just claim that since this debate is just about the parent and the child, that there's nothing about net societal benefit. Note that this parent is not just a parent to a child. This parent is a member of a wider society that they also owe an obligation to. That means that they also have this principal duty in order to make sure that society progresses. This looks like if the child has the capacity to do something like create a cure for an incurable disease, that is a massive net societal benefit that they have a principal obligation in order to make sure follows through. They never contended with anything that Bruce gave you except for one-liner responses in order to try and make this washed out of the debate. Note that at the end of this debate, this material all still stands. If they never contend with this, we already win. What does this mean? First of all, there's wider society benefits, and that's potentially great things that can happen, regardless of the scale that they try to the scale that they try to mitigate down the line. It still exists. The chance still exists, and on that, this parent has this obligation to wider society. This is an independent win path on its own because of the scale of people that it impacts. Like Bruce gave you at first, the depth of impact that occurs, because literally this could be life-changing for so many people, not just in the present, but also in the future. I think we already went on that. I'll take a point now.
Are you claiming that the parent should sacrifice their child?
Not claiming that the parent should sacrifice your child. I'll explain why they have an obligation to their child too. Okay, next on suffering. First on parents. First, I'm going to tell you that this parent is literally not that important in the grand scheme of things. Jamie already explained to you why they are not the one getting their consent undermined in the context of this debate. They're not the one getting their life path literally altered by their parents' own decision. They shouldn't matter because they don't have those principal wrongs done to them. But even if they matter, note that I'll explain to you later why it's still worse for them. Okay, first on duration and length of life. Note that by literally choosing to undo this prophecy, this life is no longer the child's because it is at the parent's discretion that they're literally changing the course of the child's life. But even if it is their life, 4 responses to this. First, this is literally extended suffering because this child lives their life hating themselves because they know they could have been more. Bruce explained to you why it is not just about hating yourself for not being able to do some small thing well. It's about knowing that you could have literally had an everlasting legacy that literally lasts eternity. Second, on extended uncertainty. Note that it is worse when you literally don't know what's going to go on in the future because you actually have 65 years that you now need to account for, that you actually have so much more uncertainty for, compared to 25 years of knowing that at least you'll achieve greatness. You know something great is going to come out of your life. You don't know if that happens on their side. But thirdly, there's just a longer period of bad relationships with your parents. You never forgive your parent, regardless of whether or not it manifests into hatred. It is still an underlying resentment that you have. You cannot just claim that by not forgiving your parents, you're suddenly going to become close again, because at the end of the day, they did something to wrong you, and that stays at the back of your head for the rest of your life. Fourthly, there's a higher chance to just act badly in the long term. When you have a long period of hating yourself, hating everyone around you because you feel like your life's choices and your right to do what you want to do is being undermined, you are less likely to act as a rational actor. You are less likely to act in the best interest of other people because you feel like other people have hurt you. Why should you benefit them? Next, on how parents just know about life. Note that I don't think that actually matters in the context of this debate because of the fact they don't know what could be happening for the child. Sure, they know what they could have from a longer life, but that doesn't mean that they know what could happen with those 25 years of greatness. They can't make a rational decision here. In fact, I think it is a more biased decision because they do have those experiences and are more inclined to accept what they've experienced and accept what they think is good because that's what happened to them. Okay. Next, on other support networks. I just don't think this is true. Bruce already explained to you how there is a likely chance that they're going to just self-isolate and self-destruct at first. This was never properly contended with down the line. That means that they're likely to isolate themselves and literally not want to talk to other people because they think they're not good enough. They think other people don't think they're good enough. They think that other people want to undermine their success in the interest of their own self. Okay, next on contact with their parents in the long term. Okay, I don't think that necessarily means that you're going to create a genuine relationship, right? There's a very strong difference. On our side, we are more likely to have genuine relationships with their parents because at least parents feel like they're doing what their child wants. The child feels like the parent has their best interest at heart. On their side, it's literally still a child thinking, even if they grew up, that their parent literally altered the course of their life. They literally undermined their autonomy, undermined their free will to live the life that they want. That is going to stay in the back of their head, regardless of whether they mature and stop overreacting to things. I think life is something that follows you. It's something that you think about for the rest of your life. They can't just try wash that out of this debate. Okay, next on just guilt and like worse relationships. Okay, first of all, they brought this up at third half, but second, even if you accept what they said, note that I think we have better relationships on our side. When there is a shorter time, parents are incentivized to make sure that they have the best time that they can with the children with the limited time that they have. But also, it is just the fact that they have a larger capacity to establish those genuine relationships. That is, that their child doesn't hate them. The child is open to talking to them. Their child is open to actually trying to establish a genuine relationship. That's something they cannot get on their side with resentment. What have I proven to you at the end of this point? I've proven to you why there is like literally more suffering for both the child and the parent, who also doesn't matter in the context of this debate, and on their side. What the impact of this is that the child hates themselves, the child hates their parents, they don't think that they can live a fulfilling life anymore because they know what could have been and they know what they don't have anymore. Note that at the end of this debate, we literally went on this because first of all, their principle is contingent on the fact that the child has a literal fulfilling life. If they cannot prove that the child has a fulfilling life, none of the principle material stands. Finally, on consent. Okay, a couple things that they told us. First, that it's not informed. Okay, first, I think it is rather informed, right? Note that in the motion, it literally gives you quite a lot of context. It tells you that the child knows that they're going to die young, the child knows they're going to suffer, but the child also knows that they're going to achieve greatness. Note that this is worse on their side for two main reasons. First, it is literally uncertain on what a mediocre life means. It doesn't mean that you know what the ups and downs may be in your life. You don't know where you're going to suffer. You don't know what type of, you don't know if you're going to suffer to a great extent. Those are loads of uncertainties that they don't have on their side. That means that they're not informed and are unable to make informed consent. But second, literally more time means that there is literally more uncertainty because there is a more capacity for something random to happen and random to pop up throughout your life. That's something they have on their side that literally means that they cannot make informed decisions. But also on rationality and coercion. Note that first of all, people literally biologically want to live long lives. Bruce and Jamie already told you this. That means that this is literally a force telling them that they should undo the prophecy. But second, the parents literally want to undo the prophecy. That means that this is another force that is telling them that they should live because their parents want them to live. But thirdly, they know that suffering is going to happen. A child is not stupid. They know that suffering is bad. Sure, they're a child and the most suffering they've experienced is maybe scraping their knee, but they've cried enough to know that that is a pretty bad experience to have, and that means that they are more likely to they generally think that this life is going to not be the greatest. But that means that the child has some level of capacity to do this cost-benefit analysis, to know what they want to do with their life. It is notice that this is more coercive on affirmative because the parent is literally consenting on behalf of the child without having their best interest at heart. Okay, next, what you think is right, what the parent thinks is right for their kid. Just because, they needed to explain why it was right. They never explained why it was right, and we proved why it wasn't because they literally don't feel fulfilled in their life anymore. But even if it isn't wrong, first, they don't consent. Second, net societal utility is literally undermined. And finally, the child's interest is fully undermined as well. What they want isn't important anymore on their side. What I've proven to you is that consent is fully undermined on their side. The child cannot consent. The child no longer have free will or autonomy on their side because their life is no longer theirs. Then we literally win on this because we have independent principles that are not contingent on practical benefits. So even if you believe they're practical benefits, we still have more principal harm. They still have more principal harm. Stand with the child. Stand with negative.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech. I'd now like to invite, we will now flip speaking orders, and I'd like to invite up the negating for their leader's reply.
Difference between side affirmative and side negating is that what we do on our side is we let the child's life play out as it was going to anyway. We let the child live a life of greatness and live what they were supposed to do, helping society, feeling fulfilled, while on what their side is they use their magical powers to shut down the child's life, to ruin it, the point at which they literally hate themselves. I think that's the point at which we've won this debate. 3 points of clash. First about what the child's life is going to look like on the both sides, second on informed consent, and then third about what society is actually going to look like. Okay, what is a child's life going to look like on both sides? Well, firstly, where does happiness come from, right? What Luca told us is that happiness comes from the small things. This looks like having children. This looks like hearing the birds chirp. This looks like making small achievements in your day-to-day life. What we told you, though, is that these movements will feel significantly less important when they grow up thinking about what they could have been. The point at which they were told that they were going to be great, all these little small things are going to feel significantly less important the moment you think that you could have literally saved the world. I think that's the point at which all of their benefits of just having this child go through their day-to-day life, being able to feel good about themselves, I think that's where they lose those benefits, the point at which the child has that direct comparison. Every day of their life in the next 65 years is going to be spent thinking of what they could have been. I think that's the point at which we've won this debate. Okay, but secondly under this is about how does knowing the prophecy change your happiness? What we told you is that the child's likely going to resent their parents. What we told you is that the child knowing the gravity of what it looks like to change the world is going to uniquely change how you perceive your the rest of your life. Because all of affirmative analysis is premised on the idea that people already suffer and they're already capable of getting through it. But what we told you is that the level of suffering is asymmetric on that front. Note then that when you are told that you were going to be great, the level of suffering you go through is going to be significantly greater. That leads to things like self-resentment. When you think that you could have been greater, when you think that you've lost out on that opportunity, I think that's what's really harmful. What that means is they're unable to lean on those support networks. They're unable to lean on those things, the point at which they know and they feel internally that they are just worse people of society. I think that's what they have to contend with. It's clear that the child is going to be significantly less happy. But second, on informed consent then, what do we hear from side affirmative? We heard that firstly, children can't make informed decisions because their brains are undeveloped, because they don't actively know what the prophecy means, because they're coerced into wanting greatness. But what we told you is that parents are uninformed to the same degree. That means that parents, firstly, also don't understand what greatness looks like. They also don't understand what it means to suffer. But secondly is that no, they also have vested interest in ensuring that their children live longer. That means that they're innately selfish when they're making this choice. It means that they're not actually being able to take into consideration the benefits for the child. Note then the point at which they do act in a selfish manner, they're unable to also have informed consent. Luca responded to saying this: my parents have comparatively more understanding of what they're going to miss out on, like having kids. But note then that it's also symmetric on their side of the house, the point at which parents also don't understand what greatness looks like. They don't understand what their child is going to miss out on, the point at which they also make that choice. What this means at the end of this point, though, is that the child does have a right to be able to make that choice. The child ought to be able to choose for themselves whether or not they should go through with this life. I think that's the point they weren't able to understand, that whether or not it's informed consent really matters insofar as they're both equally uninformed. That's the point at which having the parent inflict their own personal bias onto that child is innately coercive. That's the point at which that child's life is ruined. That's how we win the principle. But lastly, just then on this, how this prophecy is literally going to make the lives of individuals better. I think we were able to accurately explain why the level of benefit you need to give to society is going to be immense, the point at which you literally have an internal legacy, the point at which people in the next 1,000 years are going to know your name. I think that's how you get that legacy forward. I think you're going to have a lot of net benefits. I think what that means, they're unable to just understand that when we're able to get these benefits for the world, I think that also outweighs all their material, the point at which the parents' happiness is less important than the happiness of billions of people. I'm very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I'd now like to invite up the affirming for the leader's reply.
One of the most powerful forces in the world is a parent's love for their child. That's why you see mums literally lifting cars to save these individuals that they've poured their life and soul into raising. Any rational parent would always take the chance to let their children live, prevent the guaranteed suffering that they might face, and have the potential to spend more of their waning years with the person they love the most. There are two ways in which negating can win this debate. Firstly, by proving that some wider societal benefit is both likely and outweighs harms to the parent and the child in this debate. Or secondly, that the child gets more net happiness and fulfillment when they both suffer and die young after a period of greatness. and that this period of greatness creates more fulfillment on their side. Note that independent of these two paths to victory for negating, we still have a path to victory in proving that the parents' well-being suffers more on their side. This is something that they discounted, but I think still stands. So firstly, on society. Let's take them at their best. Let's assume that this child does do something very good for society. We told you that they're only one person, that they can't fix all the problems in the world, that there is like natural bounds to what their greatness could be. But we also told you that the framing of the motion tells us that the House in this debate is making the decision as the parent. And we characterize to you why the parent would always weigh the lives of their child and their own suffering over any kind of societal benefits. We also told you why they actively have to sacrifice their child and why that makes it even harder for them to make that choice. But then, let's take them... So that's even if, you do believe their material, we can still win. But we tell you why this greatness is actually too vague to be able to make this decision based on these societal impacts. Because they could very well be a great artist or musician that doesn't impact society in the same way. Because they are unable to quantify what this greatness does for society, you have to weigh the parents' and child's benefits higher. Now, on the well-being of the child. Firstly, just quickly on this principle of the freedom to choice. We acknowledge that the choice might be imperfect when the parent makes it, but we tell you that the choice is better, that the parent is more informed if they are not fully informed. They never succinctly engage with our material about brain development, about life experience, and about the coercion that children face to believe that greatness is something that they can realistically achieve. Then let's take them at their best on what happens in our world. That the child is distressed by a lack of purpose in their later life, and that the child actively hates their parents. To let them win on this material, you have to believe that the supposed pain in these 65 years is worse than three things. Firstly, the guaranteed period of suffering that they get on their side before death. Secondly, dying young. And thirdly, missing out on all of the things that could give them fulfillment. This is where the material that we gave you at Ollie about how you have a natural limit to your happiness capacity in a certain moment becomes really pertinent. They never sufficiently responded to that. And so what that means is that yes, you might get that small period of happiness because there is an emotional limit to how good that happiness can be. We tell you that a longer period of life will always be able to outweigh that when it's 3 times as long. We also tell you that it is guaranteed suffering on our side, and that is literally in the info slide, versus the potential suffering that, yes, the child might hate themselves. They never told us why that was 100% likely. We tell you that these children still have support networks and other things in life that can keep them happy, that can keep them from facing the worst of these harms. We can still win. But we tell you that the child won't hate themselves. We think this was a very assertive point. People have the capacity to move on, to mature later in life. They never gave us any reasons why the child would put this lack of greatness on themselves. And that they won't also hate their parents. They never linked the never forgiving their parents to hating your parents. They never made that gap. They never bridged that gap for us. And they never responded to our material on how you have an innate love for your parents, even if they do bad things to you. So we can prove that the 65 years aren't as bad as they say. We give you reasons, and they also never give us reasons why that period of greatness is inherently positive for the child, which means we get greater net happiness. Then on the parent, we think they are important actors. They are a person. On their side, they actively cause this child's death. That is a lot of suffering. On our side, they might have to deal with the child never forgiving them, but at least they can still see them grow and live their life. At least they still hope to maybe one day make amends.
I'd like to thank all the speakers for a wonderful debate. I'd like to invite you to cross the floor and shake hands. Exactly.
That was really, really amazing.